I noticed it the moment my brother thought no one was watching. He leaned over the breakfast table, smiling like the perfect son, and quietly dropped something into our parents' food. My heart stopped. I didn't shout. I didn't warn anyone. Instead, I calmly switched the plates. Seconds later, his wife took the first bite, and the color drained from her face. Before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe if you truly enjoy stories like this, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's begin. My name is Elena Parker, and I am 34 years old. I never imagined that one normal family breakfast would destroy my family forever. That morning started quietly. I woke up early at my parents' house, just like I always did on Sundays. After my mother's health began getting weaker, I started visiting more often to help around the house. My father pretended he was still strong, but age had slowed both of them. My younger brother, Daniel, had moved back in a few months earlier with his wife, Sophie. He told everyone it was to take care of mom and dad. At least, that's what he said. Something about it never felt right to me. Daniel had never been the caring type. Growing up, he avoided responsibility whenever he could. But suddenly he was attentive, helpful, always hovering around our parents. Too attentive. That morning, Sophie complained about a headache and stayed upstairs. So I made breakfast instead. Eggs, toast, fruit, and tea, simple food my parents loved. I remember feeling peaceful while cooking. For a moment, everything felt normal. Family voices filled the house. My parents laughed softly in the living room. I placed 4 plates on the table. 1 for mom, 1 for dad, 1 for Daniel, 1 for me. Daniel walked into the kitchen smiling. "You didn't have to cook," he said kindly. I smiled back. "It's fine." "Sophie resting?" "Yeah," he said quickly. "She wasn't feeling well." His answer felt rushed. But I ignored it. We all sat down together. Mom reached for her tea. Dad began talking about repairing the garden fence. It looked like an ordinary morning, until I noticed Daniel stand up. He said casually, "I forgot something," and walked back toward the kitchen counter. I watched him from the corner of my eye. He looked over his shoulder. Once, twice, making sure no one was watching. But I was. His hand moved quickly. From his pocket, he pulled out a tiny folded packet. My chest tightened. He opened it and quietly dropped something into my parents' breakfast bowl. A fine powder. So small. So fast. Then he stirred it gently with a spoon. And turned back around with the same warm smile. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. I felt cold all over. My first instinct was to scream. To knock the plates away. But something stopped me. Because in that exact moment, I noticed something else. Daniel's eyes moved toward me. Not surprised. Not nervous. Watching me. Almost. Waiting. That's when a terrifying thought hit me. This wasn't only about hurting our parents. This was planned. And somehow, I was part of the plan. I remembered Sophie insisting the night before. "Elena, you should cook tomorrow. Your parents love your breakfast." At the time, it sounded sweet. Now it felt calculated. If anything happened, everyone would know I prepared the food. My hands began shaking under the table. They were setting me up. Daniel sat back down calmly. "Eat before it gets cold," he said. My parents smiled, completely unaware. I realized I had only seconds to decide. If I accused him without proof, he would deny everything, and I would look paranoid. But if I stayed silent, my parents could die. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stood up casually. "Oh, I forgot the jam," I said. No one suspected anything. I walked to the kitchen, forcing myself to breathe normally. Then I returned to the table. And while pretending to rearrange the dishes, I switched the plates. My parents' bowls moved away from them. Daniel didn't notice. He was busy pouring tea. Just then, Sophie walked downstairs. "I feel better," she said sweetly. Daniel smiled instantly. Perfect timing. She sat beside him. Without thinking, she picked up the plate now in front of her. The plate that had originally been meant for our parents. I sat down slowly. My heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. Daniel watched our parents carefully, waiting, expecting something to happen. Instead, Sophie took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and within seconds, her smile faded. Her hands began to tremble. The spoon slipped from her fingers. Daniel's face lost all color. And in that moment, I knew two things. They hadn't only planned to kill our parents. They had planned to blame me for it. And their perfect plan had just turned against them. Sophie's hand shook violently. The glass of juice slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Everyone froze. My mother gasped. My father stood up in confusion. Daniel, what's wrong with her? Mom asked. Daniel didn't answer. He stared at Sophie in pure panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her. Sophie grabbed her throat, struggling to breathe. Daniel, she whispered weakly. Her chair scraped loudly as she tried to stand, but collapsed beside the table. My mother screamed. I immediately stepped back, pretending shock, though my heart was racing for a completely different reason. Daniel rushed to her side. Sophie, wake up. His voice cracked. Real fear now filled his eyes. Not grief. Fear. Because he understood exactly what had happened. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling an ambulance, I said firmly. Daniel looked at me suddenly. For a moment, I saw anger flash across his face. Almost like he wanted to stop me. But he couldn't. Too many witnesses. I dialed emergency services while my parents hovered helplessly nearby. Sophie's breathing became shallow. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Within minutes, sirens echoed outside the house. Paramedics rushed in and quickly began working on her. They asked questions. What did she eat? Did anyone else feel sick? My father pointed at the breakfast table. Elena made breakfast this morning, he said innocently. And there it was. The trap. Exactly as they had planned. One of the paramedics turned toward me. You prepared the food? Yes, I answered calmly. Daniel lowered his head, pretending distress, but I noticed the small movement of his eyes. Watching me. Waiting. Hoping suspicion would land on me. But something unexpected happened. The paramedic looked around the table. Did everyone eat the same meal? Yes, my mother said quickly. We all did. Yet only Sophie was collapsing. Confusion spread across their faces. Another paramedic collected samples from the plates. Daniel's breathing became uneven. He realized the situation was slipping out of his control. They carried Sophie out on a stretcher. Daniel followed, acting like a devastated husband. Before leaving, he turned toward me. Our eyes met. And in that moment, he knew. I knew. I had seen everything. Hours later, we sat in the hospital waiting area. Silence filled the room. My parents were terrified and confused. I remained calm. Too calm. Daniel paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. He avoided looking at me. A doctor finally approached us. His expression was serious. I'm sorry, he said softly. We couldn't save her. My mother covered her mouth in shock. My father sat down heavily. Daniel froze. His face went completely pale. For a few seconds, he didn't react at all. Then he began crying loudly. Too loudly. Almost forced. I watched quietly. Because I wasn't surprised. Deep down, I already knew what the result would be. Soon after, 2 police officers entered the waiting area. Who prepared the meal this morning? One officer asked. All eyes turned toward me. Exactly as Daniel and Sophie had planned. I stood slowly. I did, I said. The officer nodded. We'll need everyone's statement. Daniel stepped forward quickly. My sister cooked everything, he added, his voice trembling. Sophie was perfectly fine before breakfast. He was pushing blame already, building the story. But he didn't know something important. The paramedics had taken the plates, the food, the evidence. And unlike his plan, facts don't lie. An hour later, the officers returned. Their expressions had changed. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Daniel. Sir, one officer said calmly, we need you to come with us. Daniel blinked in confusion. Why? The officer spoke clearly. Poison was found only on one plate. Daniel's breathing stopped. And witnesses reported seeing you standing near the food shortly before the incident. My parents looked at him in disbelief. Daniel, my mother whispered. He turned toward me. Panic. Rage. Fear. All at once. That was the moment his world began to collapse. And it was only the beginning. Because the truth they tried to bury was finally coming to light. Daniel stared at the police officer like he hadn't understood the words. "Sir, we need you to come with us," the officer repeated calmly. The waiting room fell silent. My mother looked between us, confused and trembling. "My son wouldn't hurt anyone," she said weakly. Daniel quickly grabbed that moment. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "I was just helping set the table." But his voice lacked confidence. The officer didn't argue. He simply opened a folder. "We also found traces of the same substance inside your jacket pocket." Daniel froze. His shoulders dropped slightly. That tiny movement told me everything. He knew it was over. My father stood up slowly. "Daniel, what is he talking about?" Daniel looked at our parents, then at me. For a second, anger flashed across his face, as if blaming me for ruining his plan. Then panic took over again. "I didn't mean," he started, but stopped himself. The officers exchanged a glance. "Didn't mean what?" one asked quietly. Daniel said nothing. Silence can be louder than confession. A few minutes later, they escorted him away. My mother began crying uncontrollably. She kept repeating, "This can't be true, this can't be true." I sat beside her and held her hand. Inside, my emotions were complicated. I wasn't happy. I wasn't relieved. I just felt heavy. Because the person being taken away in handcuffs was still my brother. But the truth had finally caught up with him. The investigation moved quickly after that. Police searched the house. They reviewed messages from Daniel's phone. And that's when everything became clear. Sophie had been the one who first suggested it. The messages showed long conversations between them late at night. Money problems, debt, and one repeated topic: the house. Our parents' home was fully paid off and worth a fortune. If both parents passed away, Daniel would inherit everything. But there was another part of the plan. One message from Sophie read, "Since Elena cooks every Sunday, it will look natural. No one will question it." Another message followed. "She'll be blamed. We'll just act shocked." When the officer showed me those messages, my hands trembled. They hadn't only planned murder. They had planned to destroy my life too. If I hadn't noticed that small movement at the breakfast table, I would have been the one sitting in a prison cell. The court case began months later. Evidence was overwhelming. The poison purchase traced back to Daniel. Security footage showed him buying it days earlier. Text messages proved intention. And medical reports confirmed the poison had been meant for our parents. The judge spoke firmly during sentencing. "You did not only attempt to take 2 innocent lives," he said, "you also attempted to frame your own sister." Daniel stood silently. No excuses left. No lies strong enough anymore. He was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy. The courtroom felt cold when the decision was announced. My mother cried again. My father stared forward, broken. Families don't shatter in loud explosions. They break quietly, piece by piece. Months later, life slowly returned to normal. My parents became closer to me than ever before. Trust replaced fear inside our home. One evening, my mother asked softly, "How did you know something was wrong?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I answered honestly. Because love doesn't look over its shoulder before helping someone. Daniel had checked if anyone was watching. That was the moment I understood his kindness was fake. Sometimes people ask if I regret switching the plates. If I feel guilty about what happened to Sophie. The truth is complicated. I didn't choose revenge. I chose to save my parents. Their own actions decided the rest. That morning changed everything. I lost a brother. But I saved my family. And I learned something I will never forget. The most dangerous betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who sit at your own breakfast table, smiling like they love you.